Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Mike Butler and I'm joined by Richard Bell, and we're going to do a bit of a playback on location independent working, remote working, working from home, whatever you want to call it. Many of you will know I wrote a blog article about this back in May last year, 2020, to talk about whether I felt location independent working was here to stay, what are the pitfalls, what are the benefits, what do we need to learn from it, and felt it was a good opportunity to reflect, having gone through lockdown 2, lots of various mini lockdowns through the tiering in the UK, also now sitting in lockdown 3, which is extended into 2021. Most of us have not been into an office since probably February, March 2020. And it's just an opportunity to see, well, do I still feel the same way? And when I summarized the blog post before, I'm just going to read it off my other screen. Could I work from home and never go into an office? I could probably do my job effectively, but it wouldn't do my mental health any good. And also, is this new way of working the right thing for society and planet Earth? Many of you remember I went on a slight tangent talking about global warming. I think it's probably the right thing for planet Earth, for society. I think we'll probably get into that a little bit around communities. And some of you that may have seen my resilience discussion, we talk about resilience and the effect of community support on personal resilience. I think we'll delve into that a bit more. So without any further ado, I thought I'd hand over to Richard, do a bit of an intro, and then we'll just get stuck into the conversation. So Richard, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Hi, Mike. Yes, thanks for inviting me along. Over the, as you say, last 12 months, I've not been into London either. My executive coaching business is completely online. Therefore, I've had a location independent working strategy myself, but so are all the people that I work with from a coaching perspective. So I've been getting a lot of first-hand feedback from people working in working different models. So I think it's a really interesting topic. I think there are lots of dimensions to it, but certainly from my perspective, the key one is that personal resilience that you.
Apologies, everyone. I just paused the recording briefly because we were having some glitches affecting Richard's internet connection. Hopefully that'll be solved now. So Richard, tell us a bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, I joined the world of banking, mostly banking technology, back in 1980, and retired in 2014 at the tender age of 50. I lasted about 8 or 9 weeks before realizing I still needed some purpose. Went on to co-found a software company called Cutover, and at the same time established my own executive coaching practice, something I was very passionate about, having been exposed to coaching in my banking career, and felt it was a great way to be almost giving back and helping others. And now I've moved away from the software side, and my full engagement is around coaching and mentoring.
Yeah, and our paths first crossed in Barclays back in the day when you were still there and I was joining, and then of course through Cutover as well. I spend a lot of time, and still do now, with Kai. I've been helping them out with some of their strategic objectives with Kai and the rest of the team for 2021 and beyond. So we've weaved closely quite a bit over the last few years, very close as well. So one of the things that you were mentioning is that through your executive coaching, you've got lots of clients that are out there in various different sectors, industries, at different levels of seniority, etc. And you started to sort of hint at what they're telling you with their experiences as well. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that location independent working is here to stay now, or do you think we're going to see a mass return to commuting into central offices?
I think it's definitely going to be about blend and balance, and I think everybody's situations are so unique that I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all model. And I think one person's remote working is another person's workplace isolation. And depending on where you are on that spectrum around your own well-being and emotional resilience, and whatever else might be going on in your life. I think that balance, getting that balance right, is going to be something that's going to need a lot of thought about how you can test someone's resilience, their emotional resilience in that flexible model. I don't think for one moment it will go back, but like you, and as per your original blog, I think that sense that human beings need human beings, and I'm sure we'll touch on this as we're discussing today, but as much of that engagement with human beings is serendipitous. It's not planned, but it's also a way, when we are dealing with stresses, interacting with human beings to kind of syndicate how you're feeling in a slightly codified way, enables us to make sense of our feelings sometimes just by externalizing them. And that's I think one of the big missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle at the moment, is that loss of that serendipity.
Yeah, and obviously you and I have spoken about that. I do want to explore that in more detail, because I think that's fascinating, sort of the serendipity of connections and what you can learn from that we're just missing at the moment, because we're so focused on formal lines of communication, whether it's through a Skype message or WhatsApp or Teams or whatever it may be, that walking past someone in the hallway, you miss out on that. I do think that, when in the previous session, the previous blog, I talked about smelling other humans, trying to bring it back into a much more sort of base instincts view of the world, because like most species, most mammals, we do have a lot of scent, reliance on scent and pheromones, etc. And so I do think there probably is something in there. I'm completely unqualified to be able to go into any more detail on that, but we know that when we're in social groups, we're a social species. We need to be in social groups. And when I was talking to Toby and Ben about resilience ecosystem, it became very clear that whatever you do for an individual to help them with their personal resilience, unless there's a community wrapped around that individual, it doesn't matter. And that was a big takeaway that I took from that session, which was, we talk about arming people with tools and techniques to help them be happier in the workplace, to deal with their isolation that they may have been feeling. But if this goes on forever and they never get an opportunity to see another human being, it doesn't matter. And
Yeah.
I think the community can be at work, can be in a hobby, can be at home, can be family, can be friends. In lockdown, it's very difficult to achieve any sort of real connection, because we're not allowed within 2 meters of each other and not allowed in each other's houses, on each other's property at the moment, etc., for very good reasons. Once this is over and we get into a steady state, or a new normal, or a BAU of how we're going to return to work, that's where we have to make sure we really, really keep people connected. And in some cases, we might have to force people to be connected, because they may not necessarily naturally want to come into an office or come into a group or come into that community. But at the same time, it actually could be very good for their own well-being and motivation and connection into the organization to do it.
And I think we have to remember, this isn't an experiment, a test, or a validation that people can physically work at home or work remotely in some kind of independent model. The situation we find ourselves in now goes way beyond simply that being is this an alternate flexible working model. The challenge we have at the moment is that there are two major problems affecting people. One is perceived lack of control of all that's going on around them. And secondly, the inability to plan or project forward positively because they don't know necessarily where they actually are at the moment. And therefore, you've got two really significant things that contribute to stress. And that stress situation, coupled with this this independent working, this location independent working, it makes for a very toxic combination. If you are feeling that stress, or if your partner has lost their job and you've suddenly now remotely become the breadwinner, the challenges that person's experiencing and their experience of isolation will be very different from somebody else 2 doors up the road. Yeah. this whole thing about does location independent working work, and this has been a great experiment and validation of the opportunity for doing that. I think we've got to be really careful that we forget that it's completely cloaked in something hugely stressful.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. And I suppose, you know, we can say things like technology works,
Yeah,
stood up, but ultimately everyone's situation and scenario will be different. And that's why I think, you know, we have to treat working in lockdown in response to COVID, and then there'll be the inevitable, well, we're already feeling the economic impact of that, and others are feeling it much more than others. And that will have everyone's experience, everyone's experience will be very different. And inevitably there are some roles that can't be done remotely. You can't cook someone their dinner from home. You can cook yourself dinner while everyone else watches, but there's not
yes,
the same experience. And I think that in my view, we sort of focus what we're most familiar with. I'm most familiar with working in a banking environment and having big headquarters in Canary Wharf that we used to slog into every day on the train and the tube. And that's where I'm sort of focusing my attention on, is those sort of situations are going to move. There are other roles that probably can as well. My 9-year-old back to school, well, both back to school this week remotely, and the school that my youngest is at has done a really good job, and you can see the transformation from last time this happened, that almost every single lesson now is online on a Zoom, and that's different teachers doing different activities. So PE was hilarious yesterday, as I had to clear a big space in the lounge so he could on Zoom jump up and down and run on the spot and do push-ups and planks and things like that. And that's great that we have the ability to do that now, and people are adjusting and almost in real time to the ability to do education remotely and run PE classes remotely. And Joe Wicks is restarting his next week as well. So there's a lot going on, but it is situationally quite different. What do you think is going to happen to, so if we assume in the big corporate world, right? So in Canary Wharf, all these big banks headquartered there, you got HSBC, you got Barclays, Citi, JP, Morgan Stanley, big law firms like Clifford Chance, and even some of the government agencies are now sitting out there as well. If we go and embrace this location independent working for a proportion of the workforce, what's going to happen to corporate real estate? What's happening to London? What happens to these big hubs? Do they become ghost towns? And if so, what happens to all the businesses that exist to service them?
No, I think it is a major consideration, and I can't see us simply moving back to a model where people travel, 30, 40 miles on a train simply to sit at a desk in a large building with similar
other people
to do a job.
Yeah.
And I think the need to get together with people will become better defined in terms of what kinds of events and activities bring about the need for people to come together, and for what purpose. Is it about strategy and planning, or is it simply about employee engagement, interacting, deepening relationships with the people that you work with in a team? And probably a combination of all of those things. But I think the days of simply coming in to sit at a battery hem position to do a job that can be done remotely or in location independently, then I think that we will see. I think we'll see changes there, and I don't see us moving back into that kind of battery hen type model. What I was quite shocked in the first 3 months of the initial lockdown to be hearing from people that their organisations had already started making big decisions on real estate, on building contracts that weren't going to be renewed, based on the success of the technical experiment of remote working.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this is really premature in terms of the wider findings of what success might look like in a broader strategy around that, and not least that growing sense of stress that I talked about earlier. People, there's been, I found, quite a dip in morale as we've moved into this second/third spike. This sense that actually this thing doesn't feel like it's getting better anytime soon.
Yeah.
And although there's a vaccine coming over the hill, there's still a lot of complexity to be navigated. And therefore, that sense on that being able to positively forward plan has taken a bit of a knock. People perhaps are getting a little bit more familiar with the things that they can control, taking control of the controllable that they have, albeit quite diminished. But there's still this sense at the moment that perhaps there's less clarity as to how the roadmap plays out in 2021 and into 22. So I absolutely don't think it will go back. I think there will definitely be a rebaselining of the real estate requirement. But what I would hope is there'll be an enormous amount of creativity about the reasons and the events and the activities that will bring people together. And I'm hoping that certainly, at least 50% of that won't be based around agenda and strategy, but will be a bit more based around that need for human beings to smell human beings.
Yeah, and I because look, I think neither of us, both of us have been involved in this industry for long enough that we know that conversations around dynamic working have been going on for years, and flexible working and leveraging hot desking in our work environments. So the reality is, if everyone in my team turned up to work, they wouldn't have a desk.
Yeah.
So we run the contention ratios that used to be, well, we'll probably have X% sick, X% on holiday, so therefore we've got enough desks for everyone. But now we're saying actually we'll have X% sick, X% on holiday, and X% that will be working remotely. And so we've stacked the desks at maybe a 2-to-1 instead of what we might have been a 1.2-to-1 contention ratio previously. So the natural extension of that was to look for a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 or a 5-to-1 or a 10-to-1 or whatever it may have been. So these conversations have been going on for quite some time. The timing, therefore, of what we've been going through is good and bad. To your point, it's coming at a time when people are feeling anxious, uncertain about their futures, worried about their health and their loved ones. And then their employer may at the same time be saying, and by the way, you may never go back to work to an office again. And they might be waiting for the conversation that is that, or you no longer have a role here, or we're making you redundant, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Or where we don't exist anymore as a company. On the plus side, for companies that wanted, economically wanted to actually drive some value out of that transition, they're looking at it as an opportunity to accelerate some of the inevitable planning. And I suppose it's that balance between be a good human and be a good company for your shareholders. And be a good company, be a good human should be the same thing, but ultimately, revenue, profit, etc., is something which is perhaps looked at in a slightly different lens for too many companies. I think I do agree with you, though. It is here to stay, and the pros and cons of that, which we've gone through already. The interesting thing is, in my mind, is that you can't take away an office space completely, right? So you need to make sure that your staff, your teams, have the ability to get together. And it could be on a one-off basis. It could be, just when they need to run a bit of strategy discussions, whatever it may be. But they will need that opportunity to get together, and that's something which we need to cater for. I'm going to pause because I've got a delivery driver. Okay, apologies for pausing again, but this time I had a delivery driver who wouldn't go away, and he was waving at me through the window to pick up a box. So a good example of a profession that wouldn't be able to work from home or location independent. But we're back again and carrying on the conversation. So, Richard, thoughts of where we've got to so far in the conversation?
Yeah, I think I've yet to see a blueprint of from anyone that says this is what we believe the future looks like. I think there's lots of experiments going on with all sorts of apps and tools, coffee breaks, Zoom lunches, and all these walkie-talkies and all great things that have come along. But I do feel There's a lot of experimentation, a lot of agile experimentation going on around that. But the bits that I'm really keen to hear in those blueprints is how we identify in that new operating model. How do we identify the people that might be struggling?
Yeah.
I was reading an article, I think it was over the weekend, about some firms now getting the signals of someone saying, "Oh, is it okay from now on if I don't turn my camera on?"
Yeah.
Because my signal's not great, and therefore, it would suit me a lot better. And all of a sudden, you've lost the visual.
Yeah.
So that connection's gone. Some people starting not to turn up to the less formal sessions. They just don't see the value in it. And I think we've got to get quite sophisticated in being able to make sure that that well-being is part of that agenda, rather than just the simple provision of a bunch of tools and techniques.
Yeah. And that really starts to play into the leadership qualities that are required in a new working environment.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're starting to explore this yourself in your coaching practice, right? The all of a sudden people who are used to maybe just being very delivery focused and perhaps less sensitive to some of the other emotional needs of their teams, haven't got the benefit of other members of that team to sort of bail them out because of their
Yes.
sensitivity to those team members. Now it's really on them to start to care about all the people that work for them more than perhaps they may have done before. And that sounds terrible the way I've just said it. I played that back in my head. I didn't mean
No.
it, but you know what I mean. It may not be natural to everyone
Yes.
to have the same level of care and attention to an individual's emotional needs.
And that might not be because you're an ass. That might just be because you and I could have been in a workshop setting, me facilitating, you leading. I see a certain behavior coming from you that looks more focused on what rather than who.
Yeah.
We go coffee break and I might just say to you, Mike, just to let you know, you're coming across a little bit what focused, right? And you go, oh, I hadn't even really considered it.
Yeah.
That kind of interaction is what's being lost, I think, through this remote model. Those little informal coaching tips and hints that we can take from anyone, upwards, downwards, or sideways. I think there's a danger that we don't pick up on some of those signals.
And is that the serendipity that you were talking about?
I think there is a serendipity to that, although I think serendipity is even more random, because that wouldn't be random. That would be, so I think I've said to you before, to me, serendipity and the informality of communication, I view as being the mortar between the bricks of operating model interaction. It's the bit that's not defined at all, and it can't be defined because, if I give you an example, if we'd never met before, but today I'd met you in the little kitchen on the floor by the coffee machine, we had an awkward silence for about 20 seconds, but then we dropped a coffee cup or something, and then we'd have a bit of a chat. And I'd say, I don't think I've seen you before. And you, oh, hi, Mike, and the rest of it. And that might be it. But next week when I meet you, we'll pick up from where we left off. And I say, oh, hi, Mike, how are you settling in? Or how's it going? That's not codified. Yeah. Okay, that's evolving, and through that a relationship will come about. In 2 months' time, I'll bump into you in the kitchen, and you'll say, "What is it you're actually working?" And I'll say this, and you'll actually, I'm doing something really similar over here. Maybe it's worth, rather than just bumping into each other in the kitchen, why don't we just take a coffee over to the breakout area and talk about it for 30 minutes?
Yeah,
there is no app that is going to replace that serendipitous, evolving relationship, in my mind.
Yeah, and I think the water cooler, the chats by the water cooler, right? We or in the coffee, in the kitchens, in the coffee shops, wherever it may be, we have lost. And I again, just to kind of draw on an analogy of my youngest son at the moment, they've got a new pupil who's joined their class this week, and it must be very difficult for her because she hasn't got that. These are all her new classmates, and she's never met them, and she's don't know when she's going to meet them. Right, it's going to be months before she's really going to see them in person, and she's thrown into this virtual world. And understandably, she's quite quiet, and the teacher's doing a fabulous job of keeping her engaged. And actually, it's quite cute. I'm seeing the Teams chats of them all going, "We must include so and so in conversations," and it's really sweet. But codifying that, how to replace the natural curiosity and interaction of humans when they bump into each other with an app or a technique. It's almost impossible to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure uh, there'll be some psychologists that suggest they could do a good job of replicating it with certain questions and things like that, but I don't think you can.
I don't think so, and that doesn't mean to say, as we've said, location independent working is definitely going to change, and therefore those situations where we do bring people together is about, I think a lot of that for me is about that serendipity.
Yeah.
Clearly not serendipitous that the people have come in because it's been planned.
Yeah.
But if the less we plan when they come in, the more serendipitous it will be in the relationships and conversations that take place. I think you have to give room for that.
Yeah. I was just having a chat with another friend of mine, Mike O'Brien. I was doing a video. Those people that have watched his video will realize I'm wearing exactly the same clothes. It's not because this is my costume for video conferencing. It's just that I did it an hour ago. But he was telling me two things which I think are relevant to this conversation. One was that when he was setting up his business Opencast, him and his business partner and a couple of other folks that were sort of employees number 1, 2, and 3 went for a walk around a lake to talk about what they should do. You know, that's how they defined the strategy for the company and how to launch it, et cetera, and the target. So it was all about being in close proximity and getting to know each other a bit better and actually bouncing ideas off each other. So that's an example of something which is very difficult to replicate in a geographically distant company, especially, you know, in London. We all came in, you know, I come in from the southeast, from Kent. You came in from Essex. You've got people coming in from St Albans Way and coming down from Hertfordshire, etc. So in reality, to get to your house, it probably take me about 3 hours, but we could meet in London in an hour and a half, and so we wouldn't necessarily have those excuses. That was one thing that we talked about, and the other thing was all of those just meeting people, just tripping over people on the street and then creating a relationship. And you know, one example, he helped someone who'd broken down on the side of the motorway. It turned out to be someone who worked in a bank, and they got chatting about an opportunity for collaborating on something. And it's just those moments that we lose. So it's going to be interesting to see how we replicate that. But it feels like what we're saying so far is that working practices are likely to change. Going back to big HQs for 6 days a week or whatever it is you may be unfortunate enough to work is probably a thing of the past for most roles. But we have to find a way to keep those communities going, keep that care and attention in place that you would have got by just seeing someone, feeling someone. Because you can feel when someone's upset. You can feel someone's tense. They might not look it, but you can feel it. There's a vibe, there's something that's given off, and that's that smelling thing I talk about. And I think that's the thing we've got to work out how we can replicate physically replicate. We can't, you know, we can't replicate that digitally. And when I think about WeWork, so WeWork is going to be an interesting company. I mean, it's been a fascinating company to watch anyway because of it's just a roller coaster of terrifying financial crises for them being bailed out and carrying on with the way that they do things. But it's a fascinating company. But they've invested hundreds of millions of pounds, dollars, euros, yen, whatever, in central business district real estate to create these co-working spaces. Now, I think co-working spaces is going to become a much more important part of our future, touchdown offices, etc., but probably not where they are in the WeWork model, but actually having regional co-working would be interesting because you can do it in one of two ways. So if I look down the high street in Tunbridge where I live, I've got a Barclays Bank, I've got a Santander, I've got a NatWest, I've got HSBC, I've got law, they're all there, and Nationwide, and I know the Barclays one has got a big floor above it where you could go and touch down and work there. And it feels like an opportunity as a company, as an employer, to say, well, come and work in the branch, book out space on this, fantastic website we've set up, or here's membership to a co-working club as part of your benefits. Go and touch down one of those areas, and then you've got a community around you. It may not be your team, it may not even become people that you work with in a different, maybe in a different company, but they're actually just humans that you can actually start to chat to and throw ideas off.
No, I totally agree. And I think with home working, there is a very important boundary that's been tested. For most of us, particularly if you were a London commuter, step one of unwinding is walking out the office door. Step two is making yourself comfortable on the train to do whatever it is you're going to do for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
3 is the walk from the station or the drive to home. And then lastly, there's the key in the lock and walking in the door and going, sanctuary. Yeah. I'm in my safe place. People have lost their safe place. In a standard model of the future of flexible working, I think that will be significantly different to the world we find ourselves in at the moment, which is almost this enforced remote working with a lot of stress.
Yeah.
When that stress is taken out of that, I think the problem will be massively, some of the challenges will be massively reduced. But just remember, some people at the moment are working incredibly hard, and actually I coach young people as well as older people, and the younger people are feeling a lot of stress. There's this other thing as well, which for people who are really busting the boiler, because obviously they've also got half an eye looking at the fact of how long can my job be sustained in this uncertainty. There's that pressure every day. I've got to be seen to be putting in a good shift. The boundaries at the start and the end of the day are getting vague. Employers are starting to look on at log on times and log off times and just say, hey, I've seen it's been 8 in the evening for the last 14 nights. You need to dial that back in a bit. I don't want to see you starting before 10. I want you to go for a walk when the light's best in the winter before 10 o'clock. Or the last thing you want to do is to have a room in your house that becomes demonized. Yeah. You'd be walking past the closed door on a Saturday going, oh, on Monday I'll be back in there. Yeah.
That's a really good point. And actually, again, I'm going to draw the analogy with my kids. One of the things I was trying not to do was to set up essentially an office or a desk in their room where they would work from. But practicalities have meant that I have to. I can't have them both sat at the kitchen table because they have different schedules, obviously very different levels of education. And I need to be in here. So it's easier to stick them up there. And I don't, and that worries me that they're going to see their room as being school and play.
Yes.
It has to be at the moment, but maybe to your point, when things, I mean, schools will be different. I think we will see them go back to school. So this is a very temporary thing, but people are working extraordinarily long hours at the moment, and because they don't log off, and most people are still getting up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. Most commuters still getting up at the same time. I haven't, it's like you haven't been up to London for nearly a year, and I'm still getting up every day at 6 o'clock. Just kind of ding. Oh no, I don't need to get up yet. And it takes a long time to retrain yourself into a different pattern.
Yes.
Logging off at the end of the day.
I totally agree. And so back to your point on the collaboration areas for working, I can see more localized places that simply allow people to maintain the sanctuary of their home. Being a place that's about family, children, whatever that is. But even if this thing is 3 miles down the road in the local town that used to be a civic building that's now empty, I would rather go down there for 6 hours and then come back. So I think that would be I think that could be a healthy thing. But definitely with our younger employees, I think they're the ones at the moment we need to be placing the most care around, making sure that they are heard,
Yeah.
they are, and at that earliest stage of their ambition around wanting to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of in the early days of lockdown one, we found that as more seasoned, at a more seasoned age, that we had the ability to set up an office, if we didn't already have one, in a room that was a door away from everyone else, so we could shut ourselves away without it being sat on the edge of the bed. And then when we tried to say to everyone in the teams, everyone's going to work from home, here's a laptop, with our younger members of staff, they're particularly in London, they live in London because they enjoyed the nightlife and the social elements of being in London. Now, of course, they can't do that, and they're all house sharing. There is the only room they have is their bedroom. And so when you say, I'll send you a PC and 2 screens and a chair and all the other gubbins that goes with it, they think, well, I haven't got anywhere to put that. There's no point in sending that to me. I can't do anything. And it becomes, and then a lot of them now are moved back to be with maybe parents or friends or family that don't live in London, because they realize that the 4 or 5 housemates that they get on with when they go out drinking with them, but really only ever saw in that scenario because they're all busy at work every day, aren't that pleasant to be with and stuck in a house with for 9 months, 24/7 as well. So there is a lot of work that still needs to happen to readjust people's expectations, the way that we care for people, and as you say, some of the working environment that we have as well. And I think there's going to be some interesting opportunities in local towns to regenerate the high streets off the back of getting more footfall, because there's more people working from home or working in touchdown areas or co-working places in those towns as well, which would be quite an interesting thing. Unfortunately, that will be to the detriment of businesses and in big cities like London, but it's a sort of a rebalance, I think, that we're going to see over the coming years, in my view. But we don't know, right? We're not. We could be futurologists and come up with some crazy thing. I mean, the whole flying vehicles, etc. But it's time will tell just how well we do as a species to adjust to that change in a relatively short period of time.
No, totally agree. And I think we haven't spoken about it thus far, but that whole physical workplace assessment, occupational therapy, type situation where we all had this, that great determination and spirit to make this thing work when it all kicked off. But I think there's a little bit of fatigue around that now. I know one of my daughter's friends house shares with another lady who works in banking. I saw a photograph of their kitchen table, and on the kitchen wall, 6 LCD panels now fixed to the kitchen wall, two kitchen chairs and a table, and their laptops and machinery. And that's how they're working now. In 2012, I was a bit of a rare part of the species. When London 2012 came on, I ran to Cornwall and thought, I just don't want to be in London. And so we were lucky to have a cottage in Cornwall. So I sat at the kitchen table on a kitchen chair for 2 weeks, working remotely. And my lasting memory was a terrible backache and an elbow pain. For not sitting comfortably with a laptop at the right height, etc., etc. I still don't think we've quite got to the bottom of employer liability around workplace assessment when it comes to the remote. I know a lot's been done and great equipment's gone out, etc., etc. But ultimately, is somebody sitting on the right chair? I'm sitting here with my Herman Miller, which I purchased early on in this because I found my macro office chair just wasn't good enough for long periods of sitting in the same space. So making sure your soles of your feet are flat on the floor, the eye level and all that good stuff. So I think we've got some finessing to do around that, and how we do that safely for people. But just to reiterate, I think a lot of the well-being challenges that we're seeing at the moment are not directly related to the fact of simply independent workplace.
Yeah.
They are a combination of that situation, but coupled with a situation of significant stress. And our focus at the moment is how do we avoid burnout in people who are experiencing that stress, for which working remotely is an additive to perhaps some of that, not being able to relieve some of that stress through interaction with other people in the informal ways that they may have done that in those serendipitous ways.
I think that sounds like a perfect place to stop, because it feels like we're saying yes, but, and until we remove some of those stresses through the vaccinations that are going on, and we start to see these spikes reducing significantly and everything calming down outside of the workplace and the economy responding more positively than it is at the moment, it's going to be difficult to tell how sustainable this would be. And I think we're both agreed that feels like it will work, feels like it can work, feels like it will change, but we just need to keep monitoring.
I think one last thing would be, we have a great opportunity to be learning from this experience, not just around how technically that could work, but also in this highly stressful situation, what are some of those indicators of stress?
Yeah.
And if we could learn that now and roll that into the blueprint of the future, that would put us into a fantastic place.
Behavioral indicators that people are stressed, and even codify some of that through the way they interact with the technologies. It's a game changer, not just for now, but for everyone who's trying to ensure that their friends, family, colleagues, employees, etc., are well. Yeah. Fantastic, Richard. Thank you very much for the time today. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I think me and you we'll have to have another one of these in whenever month's time things start to settle down, and we can hopefully we'll be able to provide a kind of a view with a bit more certainty on what the future holds in this area.
Indeed. Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. It's been great talking about it.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.